30 days, 30 maps in 30 days. Emma is a actuary and data scientist and loves maps.
Is that all? Sounds good? All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming along. My name's Emma, and I will be talking to you about my experience making or being part of the 30-day map challenge and what it kind of taught me about publishing my work more often and sharing work that might not be perfect before putting it out there. Is there a way of getting rid of this? No? So a little bit about me. I graduated with a degree in statistics. I sometimes call myself a data scientist, and I also work as an actuary, which basically means I do risk analysis for insurance companies. So a little while ago, the New York Times put out this website where you could go and put your job in, and it would basically tell you what the opposite of your job was. So I went and had a look at that, and they base it on the kinds of skills that you use in those jobs. So apparently the opposite job of an actuary is a slaughterer and meat packer. And I was actually a vegetarian for a very long time. But basically, apparently I'm not being hired for my trunk strength or my ability to perform general physical activities. My old manager did say that I was one of the more extroverted and athletic members of the actuarial profession. But nevertheless, you know, we do sort of fit into these stereotypes a lot of the time as actuaries and data scientists, statisticians, and so on, that we're very interested in the numbers, we're very focused on accuracy, and we often don't like to share our work before we think it's ready, because of course we know how much better it could be, and we're not really willing to, you know, put something out there that's maybe not quite as good as we would like it to be. So with that in mind, I really wanted to push myself to kind of break out of that mindset, which I do think is often necessary, but also sometimes holds us back. And I wanted to kind of share my work more quickly, get some feedback, and yeah, just, you know, push myself a little bit. So along came the 30-day map challenge. Who has heard of that here? Yep. So basically, Topi put out this tweet in November suggesting that he was going to start this 30-day map challenge, which involved making a map every single day in November. And they had specific themes, which are listed there. And then on the right there, I've got the number of people who completed each map, which I thought was quite interesting. That comes from David Frigg's website, which you can go and have a look at if you want to see more maps. So you can see that things did kind of taper off towards the end, but there were a few of us who really stuck it out. So I actually did 27 maps. I didn't do 30. There were 3 days where I kind of couldn't really make it happen. But I think I really learned a lot from this experience of making those 27 maps and putting them out there in such a quick timeline. So one of the first things that I realized when I was doing this project is that some maps are really art. And this was actually the only map that I made that I had made in advance, or, you know, I sort of pulled something out that I'd made for another project. It's the Waikato River, which some of you will recognize. It comes from Sentinel data, and I basically did some analysis to try and identify the boundaries of the river, which was a really cool project, and I really love this picture. But outside of that, you know, you're not getting a whole lot of information about that river. It's a really nice river that I colored. And then there's some maps that are more about conveying information. So this was one of the maps I made, and it basically looks at the most popular dog breeds by region in New Zealand, and then it also looks at what people tend to name those dogs. So we really like Labrador retrievers and border collies. We're not particularly original in how we name things. So the Jack Russell was particularly popular in Nelson, which is where my family's from, and people tend to call them Jack. So this was kind of a fun map. I liked the data. I thought it was cool, but you know, it's definitely not art. And when you compare it to some of the other maps that people put out that were really beautiful and detailed and intricate, you know, you do feel a little bit like, oh, this is a bit average. But still kind of fun and informative. So one of the other things I realized as I was putting all of this stuff out there is, as Hakenwall mentioned, people really like a story. So this particular map, I had a look at some data on cats and how much they move. So I found the most active cat in New Zealand, or at least in this data set. His name was Blue Nelson, and he almost covered 4 kilometers a day. Then on the other hand, we've got Tasha, who is a bit of a couch potato, stays in that one tiny apartment and moves 42 meters on average a day. And people really connected with this because I think they could see themselves or their cats or something in that story. Another example of people enjoying a story and being able to relate to it was this map, which I made for the theme urban, I think it was. And what I basically did is I got the Stats NZ definition of what constitutes an urban area. So they have things like, you know, this is an urban area, this is a secondary urban area, this is a rural area. And that's what you're seeing in the yellow map on the right. And then I was thinking to myself, you know, what does it mean for me personally? What do I think about when I think about what's an urban area? Now, I work on Queen Street, and I pretty much buy everything from H&M because of convenience. And so I was thinking, you know, what really makes it an urban area is how far away it is from H&M. So I went and, that's the Emma Vitz definition. So I went and measured the distance, or rather calculated the distance from every house in New Zealand to the closest H&M. And that gave me that map on the left, with the blue areas being pretty close and the yellow areas being really far away, which actually lines up relatively well with the Stats NZ definitions and has a bit more of a continuous gradient. One of the other things I realized is that people really don't care about how long something takes. That's not something they appreciate when they look at your work. So this was one of the maps that was one of the fastest ones for me to make, and people really liked it. So what I had a look at here was reanalysis data, which is basically not weather observations, but rather a form of interpolation across, you know, the whole area. And it gives you a weather measure for every single, I think it's 10-kilometre grid in New Zealand. So I went back to this 1970 and I looked at the maximum wind observation in each point and the maximum rain observation in each point. And that gave me these maps. So the darker blue one on the left is wind, with the darker points being windier. And then the one on the right is rain. And it was honestly quite a quick map to make because I already had the data. But people really, you know, it's kind of visually interesting and people really liked it. And of course, sometimes you put a lot of effort into something and it's still kind of terrible. So this was a map that I made on the proportion of people who commute to work by car in the Auckland CBD, and it was done for the theme hexagons. And it took me a really, really, really long time to get my head around this particular package and how I could represent something using hexagons. And even though I spent so much time on it, I still think it looks quite terrible. You know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of information. There's no clarity. You know, you can see the beginnings of some interesting information. Some parts of the CBD seem to commute in a way that's not by car, but overall, kind of just a gross map that took me the better part of a day to make. But even when that's the case, I think you really learn a lot from putting your work out there. So this was, again, a map that I wouldn't consider to be my visual best, but I really did learn a lot because it was the first animation I made. So what it looks at is the maximum temperature at various weather stations in Australia over time. And you can see that the points change over time and they get darker when it's summer and when it's very hot, and lighter when it's cooler. So yeah, not visually, amazing, but I really did learn a lot about the animation process. So I was quite proud when that came together. So here are kind of my overall takeaways from this process. And the first one is that I really encourage people to share their work even if you don't want to, because I think, like I said, I think a lot of us in this area have personalities that don't want to and probably will never want to, because we always see room for improvement and we always know, what could I do better? What else could I do? What are the gaps and the missing, parts of this? So I think we have to push ourselves to kind of get over that a little bit. And one of the things it allows us to do when we manage to do this is to connect with others who are on the same path. So I have found this really useful in my own career and in my own kind of building of skills. I think the first graph I ever put on Twitter was a basic ggplot bar graph, and this was maybe 3 years ago. I was still at university, and Hadley Wickham actually retweeted it, and I was like, oh my god. And it was very, very basic, but I think he kind of saw that, that I was kind of trying some new stuff out, and I was excited, so yeah. And so I really think it allows you to connect with other people who are ahead of you, who know more than you, who have done more than you, but also with other people who are kind of sort of at the same stage or coming up behind you in some of this work. Another valuable thing that I think it allows you to do is when you share your work relatively rapidly, you can see how people respond before you invest a whole bunch of time into it. And I do think there's value in getting feedback from people who are very, in this field, technical, know the details, but also those who don't. So, that's one of the good things about Twitter for me, is that you do get people who consume this kind of content in a very, in passing, which is how most people would. And that, I think, allows you to become a better communicator, which is really what data visualization is all about. And I think if you have these technical skills and this, knowledge of data science, statistics, whatever, there's a real value in being quite good at or becoming better at communicating those things, so that you can not only understand all of the technicalities, but also share that with a wider audience so they can make use of what you know. So that's it. That's me. All right, so the first question is, where do you get cat movement data from? So there's a website that kind of collates a lot of movement data across the world. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. They also have things like whale movement, which is also quite cool. But the study, I think, was done mostly in Wellington, and it was done to look into predicting native birds, because cats are obviously quite a menace to native birds. So I think that was where the data was. That's why it was collected. So the second one was, which of your 27 maps do you most relate to? I've kind of put my favorites in here, except for like this one. I do really like this one here, because it was really fun working with the Sentinel data, and then it looks really cool as well. So that's definitely one that I keep coming back to. Then we've got, have you met Anna? Yes, I have. Also, is it MoveBank? Yes, it's MoveBank. That's what the data source is called. So if you want to go and have a look at that, you can see a whole bunch of movement data, which is quite fun to have a look at. How do you decide what data to work on? So that's basically, I mean, we did have these themes for this project, so every day you had a different theme, but I basically try and keep sort of a running list of interesting data sources that I can come back to later on, and I tried to sort of fit those into whatever theme was going at that point in time. Yeah. I think that looks like it's all of the questions. Awesome.